The morning sun glinted off polished glass as a line of sleek black cars rolled up to the base of a towering skyscraper. Doors opened and sharp-suited executives stepped out, their leather shoes clicking against the marble pavement. Their laughter was crisp, their pace purposeful, each one carrying the confidence of power. Then a pause in the rhythm. A man in a faded janitor's uniform approached, his shoulders slightly stooped from years of labor. In one hand, he clutched a worn lunchbox. In the other, the tiny hand of a 6-year-old girl. Her hair was tied in uneven pigtails, her small fingers clutching a stuffed toy with faded seams. As they passed through the same revolving glass doors, whispers followed. Suits turned heads, brows furrowed. "What's a child doing here?" In that moment, two worlds collided: wealth and weariness, privilege and survival. Daniel adjusted the strap of his worn backpack as he guided Emma down the gleaming lobby. The marble floors reflected the fluorescent lights above, every surface spotless, ironically, thanks to his own hands. But Daniel didn't walk with pride. He walked with quiet urgency, his steps careful, almost apologetic, as if afraid his presence might disturb the polished harmony of this corporate temple. Emma's small sneakers squeaked against the floor, each sound like a bell announcing they didn't belong here. She clung to his arm, wide eyes soaking in the towering plants, the endless rows of desks, and the busy people tapping away on laptops. To her, it was a world of wonder. To Daniel, it was a battlefield where he was already outnumbered. He hadn't wanted this. Bringing his daughter to work was the last thing he wanted, but what choice did he have? The babysitter had canceled at the last minute. His paycheck barely stretched far enough for groceries, let alone a backup sitter. And ever since Emma's mother had passed, there was no one else to call. He couldn't leave his little girl alone at home, not at 6 years old. So here she was, tiny fingers gripping his palm like he was her whole world, because truthfully he was. He kept whispering reassurances as they made their way to the janitor's supply room. "Just stay close to me, Em. Be quiet, okay? Daddy just needs to work a little and then we'll go home." Emma nodded earnestly, her pigtails bouncing. She smiled up at him, a gap-toothed smile that made his heart ache. She didn't see the shame in his uniform, the exhaustion in his eyes, or the calluses on his hands. She only saw her hero. But the world around them wasn't so forgiving. Passing employees glanced sideways, their brows furrowed. Some whispered softly, their words sharp enough to sting even when unheard. Why would he bring a child here? Doesn't he know this is unprofessional? Daniel lowered his head, focusing on his cart of supplies. He pushed it forward, wheels rattling against the pristine floor, trying to make himself invisible. His pride battled with humiliation, but the weight of responsibility anchored him. He didn't have the luxury of appearances. He only had Emma, and Emma had him. In the corner, Emma pulled a crayon from her tiny backpack. She had tucked a few sheets of scrap paper inside, treasures for moments just like this. Settling down on a chair near his supply cart, she began to draw, humming softly, her world filled with color even inside this cold, gray building. Daniel watched her for a moment, his chest tightening. That picture she was drawing, that was his only reminder that love was still bigger than struggle. And so, with the mop in his hands and his daughter at his side, he stepped into the day's battle, unaware of the storm about to come. The echo of high heels clicked sharply across the marble floor, cutting through the usual office murmur like a blade. Conversations hushed. Heads turned. The aura of authority moved before her, and when Victoria Hale, the CEO of Hale Enterprises, stepped into the lobby, the very air seemed to tighten. Victoria was the embodiment of control. Perfectly tailored navy suit, hair swept into an immaculate bun, diamond studs glinting just enough to whisper power without flaunting it. She was known throughout the company as a visionary, brilliant, unrelenting, and ruthless. To her, weakness had no place in the empire she had built. Daniel noticed her the moment she entered. His chest tensed. He pushed his mop harder, hoping to blend into the background, hoping she wouldn't notice Emma sitting quietly with her crayons near the cart. But hope is a fragile thing. Her eyes landed on them almost instantly. She slowed, her gaze narrowing at the sight of a child in her pristine lobby. Emma, oblivious to the storm forming, smiled and waved, holding up a half-finished drawing. "Hi," she chirped. The lobby froze. Employees held their breath. You didn't just talk to Victoria Hale, much less with the carefree innocence of a child. Victoria's lips curved into something between disbelief and disdain. She turned her sharp gaze to Daniel. "Explain," she demanded, her voice cutting through the silence. Daniel's throat tightened. He straightened, clutching the mop handle like a lifeline. I'm sorry, ma'am. My sitter canceled this morning. I couldn't leave her alone." Her laugh was quiet but cruel, slicing through him like glass. "So you decided to turn my building into a daycare?" Her tone dripped with mockery. "What kind of professionalism is this? You can't even separate your personal chaos from your work." A few employees shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Emma, then at Daniel. But no one spoke. No one dared. Daniel lowered his head. "It won't happen again, ma'am, I promise. She'll stay by me quiet, please." Victoria raised a brow, her arms folding. "Quiet? Children are never quiet. This is a corporate office, not a playground. Do you expect my investors to walk past crayons and stuffed animals on their way to multi-million-dollar meetings?" Emma's smile faltered. She looked between her father and the powerful woman towering above them, sensing the weight of her words even if she didn't fully understand them. She tugged at Daniel's sleeve, whispering, "Daddy, am I in trouble?" The whisper broke him. His chest burned with shame, but all he could do was shake his head gently, forcing a small smile for her sake. "No, sweet pea, you're fine." But inside, he wasn't fine, not at all. Victoria exhaled sharply as though his very presence, and Emma's, offended the perfection of her empire. She turned on her heel, her heels clicking again as she strode toward the elevators. Before the doors closed, she added over her shoulder, "This is your one and only warning. Don't let it happen again." The elevator shut with a cold ding. Silence lingered. Daniel stood frozen, his hands trembling around the mop handle. Emma leaned against his side, eyes wide, her crayons clutched tight in her tiny fist. The whispers returned, quiet, pitying, judgmental. But louder than them all was Daniel's own heart, beating hard with humiliation. What he didn't know was that this cruel clash, this public shaming, was only the beginning of something far greater. The elevator doors sealed shut, carrying Victoria Hale upward to her glass-walled empire, but the sting of her words lingered in the lobby like smoke. Daniel forced himself to breathe, to steady the trembling in his hands. He bent down, smoothing Emma's hair, whispering with a shaky smile, "It's okay, sweetheart. Just stay close to me, all right?" Emma nodded, her little face serious in a way children her age should never have to be. She held her crayons tighter, as if they were treasures that could protect her from the cold stares of strangers. Daniel pushed his cart toward the hallways, the wheels squeaking softly, announcing their presence with every turn. Employees stepped aside politely, though some stole glances at Emma, curiosity flickering in their eyes. A child in this world of deadlines and deals felt like sunlight in a windowless room, unexpected, out of place, yet oddly refreshing. When Daniel stopped to mop near the conference area, Emma quietly found a chair nearby. She swung her legs, humming under her breath, and pulled out a fresh piece of paper. With the careful determination only children possess, she began to draw. Her crayons scratched softly, creating worlds that existed only in her imagination. A bright yellow sun at the corner of the page. Two smiling stick figures, one tall, one small, holding hands. A heart floating above them. Occasionally, she looked up to check if her father was still there, and every time she saw him, she smiled. He was her anchor, her hero, and in her drawing, he was always the center of her world. Some employees walked by, slowing for just a moment to peek at her artwork. One young assistant smiled faintly before hurrying away, afraid someone might notice. Another paused to whisper to a colleague, "She's adorable." though the words were barely audible over the tapping of keyboards. Daniel caught glimpses of it all, and though shame still sat heavy on his shoulders, a small warmth grew in his chest. Emma was doing what she always did, turning even the coldest spaces into something softer, brighter. Unaware of her father's inner turmoil, Emma tilted her head, concentrating on her masterpiece. She added a third figure beside the stick versions of her and Daddy. This one had long hair and wore a triangle-shaped dress. Emma didn't know why, but something about the tall, stern woman they had met earlier made her want to include her in the picture. Maybe, deep down, she thought even that lady needed someone to stand beside her under the sun. When Daniel noticed, his breath caught. The child's simple kindness, her instinct to include even those who mocked them, felt like a quiet lesson written in crayon. What Daniel didn't realize was that Emma's drawing, innocent, fragile, and born of love, was about to travel further than either of them could have imagined. It would soon reach the very heart that had mocked them, and it would change everything. The day moved forward in its usual rhythm of ringing phones, hurried footsteps, and the hum of printers. Daniel kept to his routine, scrubbing, polishing, and mopping, always with one eye on Emma, who sat quietly sketching her endless stream of colorful worlds. But on the 20th floor, tension was brewing. Today wasn't just any day, it was presentation day. Investors from across the country were visiting, eager to hear Victoria Hale unveil the company's bold new expansion plan. Millions of dollars, reputations, and the company's future all rested on the flawless execution of the boardroom presentation. Victoria was a perfectionist, and nothing less than perfection would do. She had rehearsed every slide, every pause, every word. The massive projector screen at the head of the room was meant to be the centerpiece of her performance. At 2:00 p.m. sharp, the heavy glass doors opened. Executives and investors filed into the long mahogany boardroom, their suits pressed, their faces expectant. Victoria stood tall at the head of the table, radiating the sharp confidence that had made her one of the most respected CEOs in the industry. But then, disaster. The lights dimmed, the projector buzzed, and the first slide flickered onto the massive screen, only to vanish in a storm of static. The image warped, froze, and then went black. A murmur swept through the room. Victoria's jaw tightened. "What's happening?" she demanded, her voice like a whip. Technicians scrambled to the projector, fumbling with cables, pressing buttons, whispering frantically. One tried rebooting the system, another replaced a cord. The screen flickered once, twice, and then collapsed into darkness again. The investors shifted in their seats, already pulling out phones, their patience thinning by the second. "This is unacceptable," Victoria snapped, slamming her hand against the polished table. The room fell into tense silence, broken only by the nervous clicking of a pen. In the hallway just beyond the boardroom, Daniel was finishing his sweep when he heard the commotion. His stomach dropped. He knew that sound, the CEO's rage, had a way of echoing through walls. Moments later, a red-faced assistant burst out of the room. "Where's the janitor? Get maintenance in here now." Daniel's mop clattered against the bucket as he hurried forward. He pushed open the heavy glass doors and immediately felt the weight of the room press down on him. Dozens of eyes, sharp, impatient, judgmental, turned toward him. He swallowed hard and kept his gaze low, clutching his small toolbox. "Yes, ma'am, I'll check it," he said softly, moving toward the tangled mess of wires by the projector. Victoria folded her arms, glaring at him like a soldier watching a recruit stumble onto the battlefield. Every second felt like a lifetime. Emma, curious, had followed quietly behind. She peeked through the crack in the door, her little hands gripping the frame. Her father was kneeling on the carpet, tools spread out, beads of sweat forming on his forehead as he tried to coax life back into the failing system. To her, he looked small in that vast, intimidating room, a lone figure fighting against machines and power. "Daddy," she whispered softly, but only he heard her. He gave the tiniest shake of his head, urging her to stay back. But Emma couldn't. Something in her little heart stirred as she watched. She could sense the heaviness in the room, the pressure crushing her father, the cold impatience in the woman at the head of the table. And in her small hands, she clutched the one thing she believed could help, her drawing. Unaware that the moment would change everything, Emma stepped inside. Emma, sitting cross-legged in the corner with her crayons, watched her father scrub the marble floors, sweat on his brow, but a quiet smile on his face every time he glanced her way. To the executives, Daniel was invisible, just another uniform in the background. But to Emma, he was her hero. With childlike determination, she pressed her crayons against the page, drawing not just shapes but feelings. She scribbled a big, tall building, stick-figure men in suits, and right at the bottom, a smaller man pushing a mop with a little girl holding his hand. Above them, she scrawled shaky but powerful words. "My daddy is the smartest man here. He cleans so I can dream." Emma folded the paper carefully and slipped it into an envelope, writing only one word on the front: important. During the morning bustle, she walked, unnoticed at first, through polished shoes and leather briefcases, and placed the envelope on a desk stacked with files. That desk belonged to the company's CEO. Hours later, when the boardroom doors opened and the CEO returned from a high-level meeting, he noticed the envelope perched awkwardly among contracts and reports. Curious, he tore it open. The room fell silent as the CEO unfolded the crayon-stained note. His eyes lingered on the drawing, then froze on the words. In that instant, the noise of the skyscraper faded. The ruthless world of numbers and deadlines gave way to the raw honesty of a child. Executives nearby leaned in, confused at why their leader suddenly grew still. Some smirked at the childish handwriting, others shrugged it off. But the CEO's face softened, his eyes wet. He pressed the paper flat on the table as if it were more valuable than any deal signed that day. "Who wrote this?" he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. That single crayon note, innocent, unpolished, but overflowing with truth, pierced through walls of pride, wealth, and hierarchy. For Daniel, it was just a piece of paper his daughter made to pass the time. For Emma, it was love drawn in color. But for the CEO, it was a mirror held up to a world he had forgotten. The CEO, Mr. Harrison, usually moved through the building like a force of nature, sharp, commanding, untouchable. But that day, fate slowed him down. On his way to an early meeting, he passed by the janitor's cart parked near the staff room. Something colorful caught his eye, sticking out from a stack of cleaning rags. It wasn't a report, not a memo, not even a misplaced file. It was a folded piece of paper, crayon colors bleeding through the page. Out of instinct or maybe curiosity, Harrison picked it up. He hesitated, glancing around. It felt almost wrong to intrude, but something urged him to open it. The note was simple, shaky handwriting surrounded by stick-figure doodles. In bold crayon strokes, Emma had written, "Dear Daddy, you're my hero. You clean the floors so shiny that even angels can see their faces in them. One day I'll help you shine too." For a man whose life was defined by profits and percentages, the words hit harder than any quarterly report. He froze, staring at the innocence dripping from every crayon line. His chest tightened. His throat caught. For years, he had measured worth in achievements and status. But here, a little girl had redefined heroism with nothing but crayons and love. As he stood there, employees brushed past, oblivious to the storm unraveling inside him. He saw Daniel in a new light, not just a janitor, but a father quietly carrying a weight no balance sheet could record. The CEO folded the note carefully, as though it were priceless. For the first time in decades, he was late to his meeting. Not because of traffic or schedules, but because he couldn't shake the voice of a child who saw greatness where the world saw none. The crayon note wasn't just a message to her father. Somehow it had become a mirror, forcing him to question what success truly meant. The boardroom was silent, the kind of silence that presses down like a heavy weight. The CEO, Mr. Whitmore, held the folded crayon note in his hand as though it were something fragile, something sacred. He had spent his life surrounded by leather-bound reports, digital presentations, and quarterly profit statements, but never had a piece of paper, scribbled in uneven letters and colored in with a child's crayons, pierced his soul so deeply. The note was simple. "Thank you for cleaning so Daddy can rest. I love you. Emma." There were no grand words, no business jargon, no polished speech, just pure honesty from the heart of a child who saw value where others turned away. For the first time in years, Whitmore felt his throat tight and his eyes sting. He quickly turned away from the executives around the table, afraid they might see his weakness. But it wasn't weakness. It was truth breaking through the armor he had worn for decades. He looked at Daniel, who stood by the door, head lowered, shoulders hunched, a man used to being invisible. All his life, Daniel had been the one who blended into the background, the cleaner, the quiet worker, the one who left no mark except a spotless floor. But now, in this moment, he wasn't invisible. He was the center. His daughter's note had done what no multi-million-dollar pitch could ever achieve. It revealed humanity. "Daniel," the CEO's voice cracked slightly. Everyone turned in shock. This was a man known for his iron tone, for never acknowledging staff outside the executive circle. "Did you know she wrote this?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "No, sir, she just wanted to help me. She doesn't like seeing me so tired." Whitmore exhaled, his chest rising and falling as though he'd just come back from running a mile. He placed the note on the gleaming boardroom table between the stacks of financial reports. Its crayon colors, bright yellows, blues, and reds, glowed like a defiance against the sterile black and white of business numbers. For the first time, the executives were not talking about market shares, profits, or projections. They were staring at a child's gratitude. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others lowered their eyes, reminded of the families they had ignored in their own pursuit of success. Whitmore finally spoke again, softer this time, as if addressing not just Daniel, but everyone in the room. "We measure everything, profits, efficiency, growth, but we forget to measure the people who make all of it possible. We forget their stories." His voice trembled. "This note, it reminds me what we've lost." The room stayed hushed, but something had shifted. A crack in the culture of cold ambition, an opening for something warmer. In that quiet, Emma's crayon scribbles became more powerful than the most eloquent speech. And in that instant, the CEO knew, this was not just about a janitor's child. This was about rediscovering humanity in a world that had forgotten it. The next morning, the skyscraper's lobby hummed with a different kind of energy. Executives who once barely spared Daniel a glance now paused, nodding in quiet respect as he passed by with his mop and bucket. For the first time in years, his presence wasn't invisible, it was acknowledged. Emma's simple crayon note had cracked open walls that money, titles, and boardroom strategies never could. The CEO, still visibly moved, had arranged for Daniel to receive not just financial support, but recognition. A scholarship was offered for Emma's education, ensuring her talent would have the wings it deserved. Daniel himself was granted a stable position far beyond janitorial duties, one that respected both his work ethic and his humanity. But beyond promotions and scholarships, something else shifted, the culture inside the skyscraper. The note was framed and placed in the main lobby, where every executive, employee, and visitor could see it. Beneath Emma's uneven but heartfelt words, a small plaque read, "Never forget the people who keep our world standing." Suddenly, the divide between polished elites and overlooked workers began to blur. Conversations sparked. Executives shared stories of their own parents, of sacrifices made in silence. Employees who once ignored Daniel now greeted him warmly, some even joining him during his short breaks. And Emma, her eyes bright, her laughter filling the cold marble halls, became a symbol of innocence breaking through cynicism. Where people once whispered, "Why is there a child here?" they now whispered something else entirely. "That's the girl who reminded us of what matters." Daniel, standing in the same faded uniform, felt a strange strength rising in his chest. Not from titles, not from wealth, but from the quiet dignity of knowing he mattered. For the first time, he wasn't just a janitor in a skyscraper. He was a man whose love had changed an empire. The story was no longer about executives or glass towers. It was about a little girl, a tired father, and a note written in crayon that transformed an entire world. The boardroom was silent, a silence so heavy it seemed to weigh down the marble table, the tall glass walls, even the morning sunlight pouring through. The CEO sat at the head of the table, staring at the crumpled piece of paper before him. His fingers, adorned with a luxury watch that gleamed under the fluorescent lights, trembled slightly as he smoothed the note out. It wasn't a resignation letter. It wasn't a complaint. It was a child's drawing, scribbled in uneven crayons, the kind that snapped easily when pressed too hard. At first glance, it was simple, but then he looked closer. A stick-figure janitor with a mop, a little girl with pigtails holding his hand. Above them, a tall, shining building. But here's what stopped him cold. Every executive in suits was drawn in gray, faceless, hollow. Only the janitor and his daughter were filled with bright colors. At the bottom, in clumsy handwriting, were 4 words. "My hero, my daddy." The CEO swallowed hard, but the lump in his throat only grew heavier. He didn't notice his executives shifting uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the drawing and their usually unshakable leader. Daniel, the janitor, stood near the door, shoulders tense, clutching his cap in his rough hands. Emma sat on a chair nearby, swinging her legs, completely unaware of the storm she had stirred in this glass and steel kingdom of power. The CEO finally spoke, his voice unsteady. "Daniel, this is your daughter, S." Daniel nodded, his voice low. "Yes, sir, she doesn't have much, so she draws, that's how she sees me." The CEO's gaze dropped back to the paper. A wave of guilt washed over him, though he didn't fully understand why. He thought of his own childhood, a small apartment, a hardworking father who died too young, and a mother who worked double shifts just to keep food on the table. Somewhere along the climb to the top, he had buried that memory beneath wealth, suits, and skyscrapers. But here it was, resurrected by a child's crayon strokes. The board members fidgeted. One finally whispered, "Sir, shall we continue with the financial report?" But the CEO shook his head. Slowly, deliberately, he stood. His voice grew firmer now, carrying the weight of something deeper than corporate authority. "No," he said. "This," he held up the note, "is more important than numbers today." Whispers spread around the table. Executives who prided themselves on logic and profit stared in confusion. Some rolled their eyes, but none dared to speak against him. The CEO walked toward Daniel. He placed the note gently back in his hands. "Do you understand what this means?" Daniel looked down, embarrassed. "Just a child's drawing, sir. She doesn't know better." But the CEO shook his head. His eyes, usually sharp with calculation, softened. "No, Daniel, she sees more clearly than most of us. She sees what truly matters." Emma's innocent voice broke the silence. "Did I do something wrong, mister?" The CEO crouched down to her level, a gesture that startled everyone in the room. This was a man who never bent down for anyone, and yet here he was, looking eye to eye with a janitor's daughter. "No, sweetheart," he said softly. "You did something very, very right." Emma beamed, swinging her feet faster. "Daddy is the strongest. He cleans the whole building by himself. One day I'm gonna help him too." The CEO's chest tightened. He felt tears threaten, and for once he didn't fight them. His voice cracked as he whispered, "You already helped him more than you know." That afternoon, a ripple went through the company. Executives watched in stunned silence as the CEO walked side by side with Daniel and Emma through the marble halls. Employees stopped typing. Conversations froze mid-sentence. The janitor, who had always been invisible, was suddenly the center of attention. Some snickered quietly, others whispered, "What's happening?" But then the CEO called for an all-hands meeting. Within an hour, Hundreds of employees, from interns to senior managers, filled the massive auditorium. On stage, the CEO stood with Daniel and Emma. The crayon note, now framed, was displayed on the screen behind them. Gasps filled the room. "This," the CEO began, pointing to the drawing, "is the most powerful message I've ever received in my career. Not from a consultant, not from a financial advisor, but from a little girl who sees her father as a hero." Murmurs spread. People leaned forward, curious. The CEO continued, "We measure success in numbers, in profit, in titles." But Emma reminded me of something I had forgotten. True success is in how we are seen by those who matter most. By our families, by our children, by the people we serve. He paused, letting the words sink in. "Daniel has been working here for years, cleaning up after us unnoticed. Yet in his daughter's eyes, he is the most important man in this building. That should humble every single one of us." A hush fell. Some employees shifted uncomfortably, guilt gnawing at them. Others blinked back unexpected tears. The CEO turned to Daniel. "From today forward, you will not be invisible. You are promoted to head of facilities. And Emma," he smiled at her, "you are always welcome here." The audience erupted in applause. Some stood, clapping harder than they ever had at any company announcement. For once, the celebration wasn't about profits or quarterly growth. It was about dignity. Daniel stood frozen, tears welling in his eyes. He stammered, "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," the CEO replied. "Just keep being the man your daughter already knows you are." Emma hugged her father's leg tightly. Daniel bent down, scooped her up, and for the first time in years he felt seen, truly seen. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. The culture of the company began to shift. Executives who once walked past cleaning staff without a glance now greeted them with respect. Employees began sharing their own family stories in meetings. A sense of humanity, long buried beneath spreadsheets and deadlines, returned. But perhaps the biggest transformation was in the CEO himself. One evening he sat in his office, staring again at the framed crayon note on his desk. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. When his teenage son answered, the CEO's voice cracked. "Hey, it's Dad. I know I've missed a lot, but I want to change that. Can we have dinner tomorrow, just the two of us?" A pause, then softly, "I'd like that, Dad." The CEO smiled through tears. Emma's drawing hadn't just changed Daniel's life, it had given him back his own. Months later, on a bright spring morning, Daniel walked Emma to school. She carried a backpack covered in doodles, skipping along happily. At the gate, she hugged him tightly. "Daddy, guess what?" she said. "What's that, pumpkin?" "When I grow up, I don't want to be a princess anymore." "Oh, what do you want to be then?" Daniel asked, smiling. She grinned. "I want to be a janitor just like you, but maybe also a painter, because then I can color the whole world." Daniel laughed, tears streaming down his cheeks. He kissed her forehead. "You already do, sweetheart, you already do." As he watched her run inside, he realized something profound. His daughter hadn't just given him pride, she had given him purpose. And no title, no paycheck, no skyscraper could ever match that. Inside the corporate tower, the framed crayon note hung proudly in the main lobby. Thousands of people passed it every day. Most stopped, even for a moment, to take in the message. Some smiled, some wiped away tears. It wasn't just a drawing anymore. It was a reminder that heroes don't always wear suits. Sometimes they carry mops. And sometimes the world only sees their worth when a child's crayon reveals it.